street name holders. Now, that doesn't mean that a different ruling might not be obtained, but frankly, when we get into the multitude of indirect holdings and the problems we have with those indirect holdings in other respects, I think it would be a bit of a nightmare for us to attempt to get that program extended through into street name holders. I think the costs would far exceed the benefits, and I think that it is the situation that anybody with it in street name can move it into their own name if they want to. So I think with very small amount of effort on the part of an individual shareholder, it would offset an enormous set of problems that we would encounter at Berkshire. We can handle the present system. We've got 12 people there, and they run the annual meeting, they make movies, they do all kinds of things, and it would be very tough. And if an extra 10,000 shares participated, it'd be $120,000 of contributions. I just don't think it would be worthwhile. Our ruling doesn't presently cover the subject in any event. It's something we've thought about. Charlie?
Yeah, I think even if they changed the ruling, we wouldn't change the policy. Yeah, it would be administratively very difficult.
Yeah. We run into other problems in terms of people getting their material, just the material on the annual meeting, and we've heard from a number of shareholders that they can't get it from their broker, and they don't know what the B is all about because they didn't get their proxies, and it just street name posed more problems. Although we probably have more than, forget about the B, we have more than twice as many, I believe, holders in street name as in direct ownership. Although the number of shares is far, I mean, it'd be less than 20% of the shares, but it's probably double the number of holders. Zone 7.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Guerra. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. I've owned your shares for many years and appreciate the good job you've done. However, in this year's chairman's letter, you developed a concept a few years ago called look-through earnings.
Right.
And I failed to see that this year, and I'm wondering if that no longer is a valid concept or why you refrained from showing the data.
Yeah, that's a good question. I should have actually covered that in the annual report in terms of mentioning what, because I've talked about it and we'll talk about it in the future, and we do have a goal on look-through earnings of $2 billion in the year 2000, and that's going to be adjusted upward to allow for the fact there are more shares outstanding. It'll be the same basic goal. But there were two reasons that it was skipped this year, and like I say, I should have mentioned it. One was it was the longest letter we've ever had, and having that section in there would have elongated it even a bit more, and that coupled with the fact, and this is the important part of it, we had major changes in the composition of the company immediately after the end of the year. So our Capital City stock disappeared. At the time it disappeared, we didn't know whether it was going into cash or the all Disney stock or a combination. We had the acquisition of the other half of Geico, where even now the accounting treatment isn't clear. And I felt that the look-through earnings last year were fine, but I felt that by the time I got through explaining all of the adjustments you would have to make for the transactions then pending, that adding it to already the longest letter I've written would have slowed things down a lot and not been particularly helpful. It will be back in this year, this upcoming report and future reports, because it's a very important concept and it's something that we're focused on. It's just that last year's number would have been a mess by the time I got through trying to explain it. I normally, the accounting stuff I know puts a lot of you to sleep, but believe me, it isn't so much fun writing it either. So I skipped it this year. We'll have it next year. And the number would have been okay last year, but there would have been a lot of asterisks attached. Zone 8, please.
Yes, Mr. Buffett, good morning. My name is Ed Wolzak from New York. I'm a student and admirer of your investment philosophy. I have a question. In determining a company's intrinsic value, you seem to write or indicate that you project out a company's owner earnings for a number of years and then discount that back by prevailing rates. My question is, how much of a premium, if any, to prevailing risk-free rates do you demand when you discount back the own earnings of a company? Or stated differently, for example, today with long rates at about 7%, if you did the same exercise with Coca-Cola, at what rate of interest would you discount back their own earnings?
Yeah, we get asked that question a lot, and we've answered it to some extent in past annual reports about what discount rate to use. We basically think in terms of the long-term government rate, and there may be times when in a very, because we don't think we're any good at predicting interest rates, but probably in times of what would seem like very low rates, we might use a little higher rate. But we don't put the risk factor in per se, because essentially the purity of the idea is that you're discounting future cash, and it doesn't make any difference whether cash comes from a risky business or a safe business, so-called safe business. So the value of the cash delivered by a water company, which is going to be around for 100 years, is not different than the value of the cash derived from some high-tech company, if any, that you might be looking at. It may be harder for you to make the estimate, and you may therefore want a bigger discount when you get all through with the calculation. But up to the point where you decide what you're willing to pay, you may decide you can't estimate it at all. I mean, that's what happens with us, with most companies. But we believe in using a government bond type interest rate. We believe in trying to stick with businesses where we think we can see the future reasonably well. You never see it perfectly, obviously, but where we think we have a reasonable handle on it. And we would differentiate to some extent. We don't want to go below a certain threshold of understanding, so we want to stick with businesses we understand quite well and not try to have the whole panoply with all different kinds of risk rates, because frankly we think that'd just be playing games with numbers. I mean, I don't think you can stick numbers on a highly speculative business where the whole industry is going to change in 5 years and have them mean anything when you get through. If you say I'm going to stick an extra 6% in on the interest rate to allow for the fact, I tend to think that's kind of nonsense. I mean, it may look mathematical, but it's mathematical gibberish in my view. You better just stick with businesses that you can understand, use the government bond rate, and when you can buy them something you understand well at a significant discount, then you should start getting excited. Charlie?
Yeah, the discounts were once greater than we now see.
That's all you're going to get, folks. Zone 1.
Hi, Warren. It's Peter Newman, Nick and Racky's son. You can't see me because I'm on your hard left over here. And by the way, Racky says to send her love to you,
Great.
And Susie. I'm going to take a cue from something that the guy who asked the questions about the World Book. I know you're loath to normally interfere in the running of your individual corporations because they do so well on their own. And I am particularly fond of See's Candy and their products. You may or may not know that we have a chocoholic in our family, as you do in yours.
Yeah. Makes good chocolate syrup, too.
Yeah, I won't mention who. However, when I was in there this Christmas buying some gifts, I noted that with the exception of the little candy canes, there's nothing in that store that is fat-free. And we are facing a trend in the world, especially in dessert items and ice cream and candy items, of fat-freeness. And I just thought that perhaps it would be worth a word to management to consider expanding the hard candy line.
Yeah. Well, we look at a lot of things. One of the problems, as you probably know, for example, in using aspartame, is it doesn't interact well with heat, and so that's been sort of tough. Now, Charlie and I have kept getting our regular boxes of candy during this weight loss program, and we've devoured them. And candy, it's maybe on average 100 and depends on whether it's a sugared product or not. But to take the lollipop, it'd be about 110 calories per ounce. But that's 1.5 or 1 1.25 lollipops or something like that. Most things are. in that 100 per ounce to 150 per ounce range. So the candy is not a specific no-no. If we can find something that the customer likes that makes them think they're getting skinnier by eating it, that will be a breakthrough, and we look forward to it. And we test everything that comes along. I can assure you. In fact, Charlie and I may be the main testers, but Chuck Huggins is here today, and if you've got any ideas on it, who runs Seas, done a terrific job of running Seas ever since we took over in 1972. He'd appreciate ideas, but we are looking for things that appeal to the consumer, that taste good, and that they'll go for. I mean, just as is the Coca-Cola company in terms of carbonated soft drinks. So it's a constant subject, and there were high hopes on aspartame originally, but it just hasn't panned out in terms of candy. And I read a few articles about the it should be the fat substitute, which didn't get me too excited about trying it, but I'm not sure whether some of you read those articles or not. We'll keep looking, Peter. I appreciate it. Zone 2.
Good morning, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. As an aspiring shareholder, I'm very happy and proud to be here. Maybe I can encourage Mr. Munger to respond to my question this morning. In regards to your purchase of the other half of Geico, would you comment on your reasoning behind paying the premium above market value, and why you instead did not purchase shares in the open market?
Very many shares in the open market at the quoted price, and the price we paid for the large number of shares we got, we thought was a very satisfactory price.
Yeah, what Charlie says 100% right. We also had a restriction that we agreed to many years ago, almost 20 years ago, as to the number of shares we would own without the consent of the directors and I believe the insurance department. So we actually had some special restrictions on us in the case of Geico, but if we hadn't had those restrictions, we'd have behaved in exactly the same manner. And we didn't think we could buy it any cheaper than that price, and we gulped a few times and paid it, and I think we will be happy that we did as it's turning out. Geico is doing very well. I mean, I knew it would do well, but I feel very good about it. Zone 3.
Mr. Buffett, my name is David Lowe from Ventura, California. My first Berkshire meeting, and I want to mention that I'm very intrigued at the influence you have over the shareholders here. I note that the first beverage they ran out of in the lobby was Cherry Coke. My question is about the Buffalo News. You say in the letter for the 95 report that the newspaper industry has lost another notch in its economic attractiveness. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, what you are seeing in newspapers is a circulation trend that has been prevalent for a long time in terms of newspapers per household, but that has been declining, and that daily newspapers, and that I would say the trends of the last couple of years are somewhat worse in that respect. I would say that the ability to price both at the circulation and advertising level has weakened a bit in recent years, not dramatically, but it's weakened a bit. At one time, newspapers really, daily newspapers in single newspaper towns were probably as attractive economically as any business you could find. I mean, a large percentage of advertisers had very little choice in terms of using them as an advertising medium. People had less options in the way of learning what was going on around them other than the daily newspaper. So that they started from a position of extraordinary strength. They still have a very strong position, and I've tried to emphasize in that report. I mean, they're a bargain at the price they sell for. They give you all kinds of information with very low price, and they're a magnificent way for most merchants to reach their customers. But they do not have the exclusive advantages in many cases that they had 15 or 20 years ago. Third-class mail has become more of an option. People have more ways of obtaining information. As we talked earlier, information can be processed electronically and delivered at far lower cost than people dreamt of 20 years ago. So all of those things eat away a little bit. It's still a very fine business. But I don't see anything that will reverse those trends. I don't think that they will necessarily accelerate, but I think that if the only thing you owned in life was a daily newspaper in a single newspaper town 20 years ago, you would feel slightly less secure today than you did at that time, but you'd still be a lot better off than owning virtually any other business. Charlie?
Nothing to add.
How about Zone 4?
Mr. Buffett, my name is Hutch Vernon. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. I know that you read lots and lots of annual reports, and I'm curious what you are reading for, if you would share that with us. But I'm more curious, because I think I know what you're reading for, if there are any disclosures, any further disclosures that you would like to see companies make in their financial reporting, or that the SEC require in financial reporting or proxies or other communications with their shareholders. And that would be for both you and for Mr. Munger.
Yeah, the main thing that they can't mandate in annual reports, I really like to have, I like to know as much as I can about the person that's running it and how they think about the business and what's really going on in the business. In other words, I would like to have a report that would be identical to what if I to have a report that would be identical to what if I owned half of a company but was away for a year and I had a partner who owned the other half. When I came back, all coming up and all of that. Of the report is now the SEC mandates a lot of information and some of that is helpful. But there's an intent behind the report. I mean, if it's a sales document, I'm less interested. I don't see any way to mandate what I'm talking about. But that's the kind of report I'm looking for. What I'm trying to do as I read reports, I like to understand just generally what's going on in all kinds of businesses. If we own stock in a company, in an industry, and there are 8 other companies that are in the same industry, I want to own or be on the mailing list for the reports for the other 8 because I can't understand how my company is doing unless I understand what the other 8 are doing. I want to have the perspective of, in terms of market share or what's going on in the business or their margins or the trend of margins or all kinds of things that I can't get unless I know. I can't be an intelligent owner of a business unless I know what all the other businesses in that industry are doing. And so I try to get that information out of a report. If I'm thinking about investing in a specific company, I try to size up their business and the people that are running it. And over the years, I found reading a lot of reports to be quite useful in terms of making business decisions at Berkshire. If we own a whole of a business, I want to own shares in all of the competitors just to keep track of what's going on. And I want to be able to intelligently evaluate how our managers are doing that, and I can't do that unless I know the industry backdrop against which they're working. It's amazing how well you can do in investing really with what I would call outside information. I find inside information, I'm not sure how useful that is, but outside information, there's all kinds of information around as to businesses, and you don't have to understand all of them. You just have to understand the ones that you're thinking about getting in, and you can do it if you just, but nobody will do it for you. You can't read in my view, you can't read Wall Street reports and get anything out of them. You have to do it yourself and get your arms around it. I don't think we've ever gotten an idea, in 40 years from a Wall Street report, but we've gotten a lot of ideas from annual reports. Charlie?
What I find is that it takes a long time to read the annual report, even if it's a comparatively simple business. Because if you really are trying to understand it, it's not a bit easy.
Yeah, I would say that on average in a business we're really interested in, even though we know what to skip to some extent, what to read, I mean, it's going to be 45 minutes or an hour on a report, and if there are 6 or 8 companies in the industry, that's going to be 6 or 8 hours perhaps, and then there are quarterlies and a lot of other. I mean, the way you learn about businesses is by absorbing information about them, thinking it, deciding what counts and what doesn't count, relating one thing to another, and that's the job. And you can't get that by looking at a bunch of little numbers on a chart bobbing up and down about or reading market commentary and periodicals or anything of the sort. That just won't do it. You've got to understand the businesses. That's where it all begins and ends. Zone 5.
Mr. Buffett, my name is Hank Strickland. I'm from Fairfax, Virginia, which if it were a city would be the 10th largest in the United States. I'm here as a stockholder, and my daughter, who's also my broker, is here with me. We were also out there Friday night when we watched you warming up for the beginning of the ball game, and we noted that you didn't drop the ball. You seemed to be able to get it to the guy that was warming you up. We noticed your first pitch, which I had difficulty characterizing as either being a pass ball or a wild pitch.
It was a premature sinker, actually. Very, very hard to hit, I might add.
And then you moved sprightly into the stands, did a lot of picture-taking, photo opportunities, signed autographs, vaulted over a rail or two, and we noted with great enthusiasm your fitness. Now, that all having been said, many people would characterize Berkshire as a one-man company, with all due respect to Charlie. And many of us in this audience here, I'm sure, are retired or semi-retired. It's not unthinkable that perhaps you might want to retire, or for good God's sake.
It's unthinkable.
Unthinkable.
I don't want that one to go by.
or for something worse could happen. And for those
that would be the worst. I think.
Well,
I think death would be second.
I could think of some things some of us might want to do to protect our sizable investments, say, having owned Berkshire since blue chip stamp days. But anyway, we could put in a stop order, might take out an insurance policy. We might ask Charlie to masquerade as Warren after you moved on. Those don't seem like very attractive options. I'm very serious now. Yeah. How would you respond to the question of a stockholder that's really concerned about Berkshire being a one-man show?
Yeah, well, Berkshire is not a one-man show. It's a two-man show in terms of capital allocation. There's no question about that at present. But it's run by many managers that are doing an outstanding job and that don't need any guidance from Charlie or me as they go along. But I might say that I will die with all of my Berkshire stock essentially, and that stock will be held either in the family or in a foundation, depending on the order of death, for a long time thereafter. So there's no one that's more concerned about the subsequent management issue than I. I mean, this is not something that ends at all on my death, and it doesn't end for the Buffett family or the Buffett Foundation. So it's a subject that Charlie and I have both thought about. The most likely situation, you got to get away from the idea that it's a one-man show, because right now we've got 33,000 people working for Berkshire out there, as we speak. And I'm sitting around, watching movies about myself or something. I mean, you can see how vital I am to the place. But the question, and the other thing we do besides allocate capital is we do identify these managers and hopefully we make it attractive for them to stay and work for Berkshire. But that doesn't require 150 IQ or anything to do that. It does require a certain sensitivity to why people want to get up in the morning and do what they do. And when I'm not around, the logical, at some point, depends on exactly when it happens, but Charlie's a little older than I am, and it's likely that it will be broken into a two-person function again, but not exactly the way Charlie and I function, and that is that there will be someone in charge of investments and capital allocation. I mentioned Lou Simpson's position because he is younger than I am in the annual report, and then someone in charge of operations, and we have that person in the organization now. Now, I don't know what the situation will be when I die, because it could be in 20 minutes or it could be in 20 years, and when that, so I can't specifically name the individuals. We have the individuals now for both those functions. We'll have the individuals for the same functions 20 years from now. I don't know whether they'll be the same people, but it's quite a logical way to run the business. GEICO was run that way, and still is run that way, and has been for some years. It's always struck me as terribly illogical the way property casualty insurance companies are run, because they've been dominated by the underwriting side of the business, and here they have this important investment side, but it's always been, virtually every company's been subservient to the underwriting end. GEICO very logically set up a co-CEO arrangement some years back, where originally Bill Snyder and before that, but Tony Nicely ran the underwriting end of the business, and Lou Simpson ran the investment side, and those are two very different functions. Same person logically doesn't fit both functions in most cases. I mean, it's a rarity when the same person happens to hit for both functions. So GEICO worked very well that way, still works that way. Lou runs investments, Tony runs underwriting, and Berkshire, slightly different. It's a variant on it, but essentially at Berkshire headquarters you need someone overseeing and not meddling in them too much, but making sure you've got the right manager and you're treating them fairly. You need someone on the operating side. You need someone on the investment and capital allocation side. We've got those people now, and we'll have them, whenever it happens too. But that is the structure, and we've got some very good businesses. And nobody's buying See's Candy because they think I'm sitting in some office in Omaha, and no one's buying a GEICO insurance policy because my name is there as chairman or CEO. The businesses are marvelous businesses. They'll continue very well, and there will be a capital allocation problem then, just like there is now, and there will be the problem of keeping good managers in place and treating them fairly, and that's a solvable problem. So that's the future as seen from Keywood Plaza. Charlie?
Yes, if you just run your mind through all the assets, I think you will quickly decide that there are large momentums in place that would do very well without us. Is Coca-Cola going to suddenly stop selling because some manager's dead at Berkshire Hathaway? Are the people going to stop using Gillette razor blades? Is GEICO suddenly going to stop being intelligently run? Is the Nebraska Furniture Mart going to try any less hard? So the existing assets, you can argue, have been lovingly put together so as not to require continuing intelligence at headquarters. And what there would be a disadvantage in that I think would be unreasonable to expect that a successor would be as good at making new investments as Warren has been in the past. Well, that's just too damn bad.
The sympathetic ear over here. Let's see, where are we? Zone 6 now? Or,
Mr. Buffett, I'm indebted to Walter Schluss for introducing me to you some 40 years ago, and finally in the early 80s I became a stockholder. My question is, now that you've expanded headquarters 9% from 11 people to 12 people, do you now more frequently answer letters from stockholders? As a specific, had you looked at my letter from January 1986,
We haven't gotten to January yet.
relating to Cap Cities, ABC, and Talk Radio, the problem that occurred last month at Cap Cities might have been prevented.
You should get a form letter from us, but we do not. We do not get into the activities of our investee companies. I mean, if people are unhappy about Coca-Cola or Gillette, and they shouldn't be, but if they happen to be, they should talk to the companies themselves. I don't interject myself into the management or operations of the investee companies. In terms of questions about Berkshire, I put in the annual report a few years back. Just running Berkshire takes up a fair amount of time in terms of keeping track of a lot of businesses, and doesn't need to take up as much time as it does with me, but I enjoy it. But I feel that the annual report, the annual meeting, are the time to take up everything on shareholders' minds, and so I don't answer one-on-one questions. I get all kinds of letters. They want career guidance. They want advice on their business. I mean, there's a million letters that come in, and it would really be it would take a significant amount of time that otherwise would be spent on Berkshire to reply to that sort of thing. I may note them in terms of what I address in subsequent annual reports, but the annual meeting and the annual report I feel are the best ways to communicate with shareholders, and I really don't do. Okay, if we've got a monitor over in zone 1, we're ready to start.
Yes. Thank you very much. My name is Maria Nicholas Kelly. I'm from Tacoma, Washington. And my husband and I have rather different investment approaches. And in 1988, he bought me one share of Berkshire so that I could learn something about investing. We both started about that same time, and he has chosen to invest in, let's say, about 40 different stocks and buying and selling, and doing rather well for us, frankly. My approach is more simple, and basically I finally figured out last year that I should invest in the companies of the two monthly, more Berkshire and Microsoft. So then this year, and so we've been able to do that. This year we read in your report that Berkshire is selling at a price at which Charlie and I would not consider buying it. So my husband has challenged my investment strategy. I know that you are an honest man, and while you may not recommend to my partner, Charlie, to buy more Berkshire at this time, do you recommend that I continue my rather automatic investment buying of Berkshire? And I think I know the answer, but I wanted my husband to hear it from the horse's mouth.
I think you're using me here.
What?
Well, we don't recommend selling it, but we don't recommend buying it either. We are neutral on that subject, and I hope you continue to be in with the two wealthiest guys. I like the other fellow too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Zone 2.
Mr. Buffett, I am Harriet Morton from the Emerald City, the same area, the land of Microsoft. And I have a couple small questions. The first one is recognizing your lack of interest in technology or sense of familiarity with it. I'm wondering if you'd give a few comments on Bill Gates as a manager. But the second one, dealing with a business that you're familiar with, has to do with American Express. Would you comment on American Express's strategy to deal with their declining market share in the credit card industry and the rising importance of debt cards? Thank you.
I'm not sure I got that entirely, Charlie. Did you? I mean, I got the part about the American.
Gates as a manager and American Express as with the problems in declining in market share.
Well, the first part is very easy. Bill Gates is one of the great managers of all time, and is an exceptional business talent who loves his business. And when you get that combination and a high energy level, and now an heir to leave it to, I don't think you do much better than that. American Express is has slipped over from where they were 20 years ago, obviously in the credit card business, and I think they may have taken their customer a little bit for granted for a while. I think Harvey Golub is very focused on correcting that, and has made some progress. But the credit card business is a very different competitive struggle now than it was 20 or 25 years ago. Interestingly enough, American Express itself backed into the business because they were worried about what was going to happen to their traveler's check business originally, and they saw Diners Club come along, a fellow named Ralph Schneider, and started in, and they saw the inroads that were being made. So the credit card was a reactive move, and for a while they really dominated the field, and of course they still dominate the travel and entertainment part of it. But credit cards are going to be a very competitive business over time, and you need to establish, or American Express needs to establish special value for its card in some way, or it gets more commodity-like. It's not an easy business, but they've got a strong franchise. It is not what it was 20 years ago relative to the competition. Zone 3.
Good afternoon. My name is John Weaver. I'm a shareholder from Bellingham, Washington. You have discussed what a wonderful business is. One of the criteria is in your acquisition page 23 of your annual report is management. Could you discuss how you decide what good management is and how you decide whether you have a good manager?
The really great business is one that doesn't require good management. I mean, that's a terrific business, and the poor business is one that can only succeed or even survive with great management. And but we look for people that know their businesses, love their businesses, love their shareholders, want to treat them as partners, and we still look to the underlying business. Though if we have somebody that we think is extraordinary, but they're locked into one of those terrible businesses, because we've been in some terrible businesses, and the best thing you can do probably is get out of it and get into something else. But there's an enormous difference, frankly. There's an enormous difference in the talent of American business managers. The CEOs of the Fortune 500 are not selected like 500 members of the American Olympic track and field team, and it is not the same process, and you do not have the uniformity of top quality that you get with the American Olympic team in any sport. You do not get that in top management in American business. You get some very able people, some terrific people, like a Bill Gates that we just mentioned, but you get a lot of mediocrity too, and the test. I think in some cases that it's fairly identifiable who has done an extraordinary job, and we like people that have batted 350 or 360 in terms of predicting that they're going to bat over 300 in the future. And some guy says, I batted 127 last year, but I've got a new bat or a new batting coach. Some management consultant has come in and told them how to do it, supposedly. We're very suspicious of that. So we don't like banjo hitters who suddenly proclaim that they can become power hitters, and then we try to figure out what their attitude is toward shareholders, and that isn't uniform either throughout corporate America. It's far from uniform. We still want them to be in a good business, though. I would emphasize that. And we feel that, when I gave the illustration of Tom Murphy in the annual report. No one had either the ability, no one could top his ability or integrity in terms of the way he ran Cap Cities for ability or integrity in terms of the way he ran Cap Cities for decades. And he not only thought about them, he knew what to do to forward their interests. And in terms of building the business, he only built it when it made sense, not when it did something for his ego or to make it larger alone. He did it when it was in his shareholders' interests. And they're not all Tom Murphys, but when you find them and they're in a decent business, you want to bet very heavily and not make the same mistake I made by selling out once or twice too. Was that zone 3 or zone 4?
My name is Mark Hake. I'm from Scottsdale, Arizona, and I'm very interested in your policies on diversification and also how you concentrate your investments. And I've studied your annual reports going back a good number of years, and there's been years where you had a lot of stocks in your marketable, equitable securities portfolio, and there was one year where you only had 3 in 1987. So I have 2 questions. Given the number of stocks that you have in the portfolio now, what does that imply about your view of the market in terms of, is it fairly valued, that kind of idea? And second of all, it seems that whenever you take a new investment, you never take less than about 5% and never more than about 10% of the total portfolio with that new position. And I wanted to see if I'm correct about that.
Yeah, well, on the second point, that really isn't correct. We have positions which you don't even see because we only listed the ones above 600 million in the last report, and obviously those are all smaller positions. Sometimes that's because they're smaller companies and we couldn't get that much money in. Sometimes it's because the prices moved up after we bought them. And sometimes it's because we may be selling the position down even. But so there's nothing magic. We like to put a lot of money in things that we feel strongly about. And that gets back to the diversification question. We think diversification is, as practiced generally, makes very little sense for anyone that knows what they're doing. Diversification is a protection against ignorance. If you want to make sure that nothing bad happens to you relative to the market, you own everything. There's nothing wrong with that. That is a perfectly sound approach for somebody who does not feel they know how to analyze businesses. If you know how to analyze businesses and value businesses, it's crazy to own 50 stocks or 40 stocks or 30 stocks probably, because there aren't that many wonderful businesses that are understandable to a single human being in all likelihood. And to have some super wonderful business and then put money in number 30 or 35 on your list of attractiveness and forego putting more money into number 1 just strikes Charlie and me as madness. And it's conventional practice, and it may, if all you have to achieve is average, it may preserve your job, but it's a confession in our view that you don't really understand the businesses that you own. On a personal portfolio basis, I own 1 stock, but it's a business I know, and it leaves me very comfortable. Do I need to own 28 stocks in order to have proper diversification? It'd be nonsense. And within Berkshire, I could pick out 3 of our businesses, and I would be very happy if they were the only businesses we owned and I had all my money in Berkshire. Now, I love the fact that we can find more than that and that we keep adding to it. But 3 wonderful businesses is more than you need in this life to do very well. And the average person isn't going to run into that. If you look at how the fortunes were built in this country, they weren't built out of a portfolio of 50 companies. They were built by someone who identified with a wonderful business. Coca-Cola is a great example. A lot of fortunes have been built on that. And there aren't 50 Coca-Colas. There aren't 20. If there were, it'd be fine. We could all go out and diversify like crazy among that group and get results that would be equal to owning the really wonderful one. But you're not going to find it. And the truth is you don't need it. I mean, if you have a really wonderful business is very well protected against the vicissitudes of the economy over time and the competition. I mean, we're talking about businesses that are resistant to effective competition. And 3 of those will be better than 100 average businesses. And they'll be safer, incidentally. I mean, there is less risk in owning 3 easy-to-identify wonderful businesses than there is in owning 50 well-known big businesses. And it's amazing what has been taught over the years in finance classes about that. But I can assure you that I would rather pick, if I had to bet the next 30 years on the fortunes of my family that would be dependent upon the income from a given group of businesses, I would rather pick 3 businesses from those we own than own a diversified group of 50. Charlie?
Yeah, what he's saying is that much of what is taught in modern corporate finance courses is twaddle.
You want to elaborate on that, Charlie?
You cannot believe this stuff. I mean, it's modern portfolio theory, and
it has no utility. But I mean, it will tell you how to do average. But I think anybody can figure out how to do average in 5th grade. I mean, it's just not that difficult. And it's elaborate, and there's lots of little Greek letters and all kinds of things to make you feel that you're in the big leagues. But there is no value added.
I have great difficulty with it because I am something of a student of dementia, and I have.
We hang around a lot together.
And I can ordinarily classify dementia, on some theory structure of models, but the modern portfolio theory, it involves a type of dementia I just can't even classify. No. Something very strange is going on.
Yeah. If you find 3 wonderful businesses in your life, you'll get very rich. And if you understand them, bad things aren't going to happen to those 3. I mean, that's the characteristic of it.
By the way, maybe that's the reason there's so much dementia. If you believe what Warren said, you could teach the whole course in about a week.
Yeah. Yeah, and the high priest wouldn't have any edge over the lay people, and that never sells well.
Right.
Okay, zone 5 are we over there?
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Buffett, Mr. Munger, Board of Directors. Wanted to ask, in looking ahead, do you see the trends of extensive outsizing, the offshoring, the downsizing, the expendable workforce, the right-sizing, the diminished commitment to company loyalty, and the greater emphasis on the short-term, quick buck bottom line versus your commitment to the long-term investment affecting your pool of investment possibilities and your decision processes, and do you possibly think of creating new companies on your own?
Well, I think that the trends you talk about are the attention devoted to them could have some. Trends you talk about are the attention devoted to them could have some. Historically, every industry at all times is interested in downsizing or becoming more efficient. Now, if the industry is growing, you can achieve efficiency by doing more work or turning out more output with the same people. But if you go back 150 years and look at the percentage of people in farming, for example, farming has downsized from being a very appreciable percentage of the American workforce to a very small percentage, and essentially that's released people to do other things. So it's in the interests of society to get as much output in anything as it can per unit of labor input. it's very difficult on the individual involved, and you know, it's no fun. I guess it's no fun being a horse when the tractor comes along, or a blacksmith, and when the car comes along. But so I don't quarrel with the activities. I quarrel sometimes with how it's done, and I do think there's been a certain lack of, in certain cases, some empathy or sensitivity in terms of the way it's being done. You should try to make in cases some empathy or sensitivity in terms of the way it's being done. You should try to make that will require us off people over time, because we hope that physical output grows and that we become more productive and can keep the same number of people to get greater output. Dexter Shoe has done a great job of that over time. They've become more and more productive, but they've sold more shoes instead of selling the same number of shoes and letting people go. But sometimes industry trends, I mean, at World Book we have fewer people than we had a year or two ago, and we don't have any answer to that. Over time we got out of the textile business. I wish we didn't have to, but we did not know how to run a textile company in New England and compete effectively. Like I say, I love avoiding those businesses, and to the extent we can, we will. I mean, Geico is going to add people over time, and I think Berkshire Hathaway is going to add people over time. But it is in the interest of society to do jobs more effectively. It's also in the interest of society, it seems to me, to take care in some way of the people that are affected by that activity. And either, in some cases, it may be retraining, but in other cases, you know, it doesn't work so well if you're 55 years old and you've been working in a textile mill all your life, and all of a sudden the guy that runs the place can't make any money out of selling your output. I mean, that's not the fellow's fault that's been working in the textile mill for 30 years. So there's a balance in that. I think that the attention that's come about lately, I think there's, to some degree, it was a media fad based on some particularly dramatic examples at a couple of companies. I don't think there is more displacement going on now as a percentage of the labor force annually than there was 10 years ago in terms of reconstituting what people do. But it's gotten a lot of attention lately. There could be a backlash on that in terms of corporate tax rates or a number of things, and we might feel it in that direction. We want at Berkshire to do everything as efficiently as we can. Part of that, in a big way, is not taking on a lot of people we don't need. I mean, a lot of the mistakes that are being corrected now are because people got very fat, and their businesses got very fat in the past and took on all kinds of people they don't need. We see that in a lot of businesses that we're exposed to, and as long as they're very prosperous, really no one does very much about it. And then when time comes, they all of a sudden find out they can get way more output. The oil companies are a classic example. You know, the people probably actually needed to produce, refine, and market oil probably hasn't changed that much. But if you look at the employment relative to the barrels produced, refined, and marketed, it's gone down dramatically over 20 years ago. To me, it just means that they weren't being run that well 20 years ago, and it never should have occurred in the first place. We don't want to take on more people than never should have occurred in the first place. We don't want to take on more people than businesses, because we don't want to lay people off either. Charlie?
Name a business that has been ruined because it was over downsized. I cannot think of a single one, but if you ask me to name businesses that were half ruined or ruined by bloat, I mean, I could just rattle off name after name after name. It's gotten fashionable to assume that downsizing is wrong. Well, it may have been wrong to let the business get so fat that it eventually had to downsize. But if you've got way more people than are needed in the business, I see no social benefit in having people sit around half employed or unemployed.
And you're very likely to compete against some guy at some point who doesn't have more people around than needed in the business too. But it doesn't change. For the people involved, they've got real problems. And
Warren, can you name one that has been ruined by over downsizing? There must be one, but
well, it's like Eisenhower said about Nixon. Give me a week and I'll come up with something. Yeah. How about Zone 6?
Mr. Buffett, Mr. Munger, I'm Walter Kay of New York City.
We're glad to have you here, Walter.
What?
We're glad to have you here. Walter's been a good friend.
Thank you very, very much. You just make me more of an egomaniac, a humble egomaniac by saying that. I don't know if Mr. Munger's wife is here and Mrs. Buffett is here, but back east where I come from in New York, they say when men are successful, it's their wife's doing. But if they're a failure, it's because they're lazy. But anyhow, I just wanted to, again, thank you very much. You've done such great things for our family. It's absolutely incredible. And to those of you who don't know these two gentlemen, besides being financial geniuses, and you all know Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger too, they're the finest human beings you'll ever meet. I mean, just the way they explain this downsizing is the most intelligent thing I've ever heard. And eventually, these people eventually find work. They have to be re-educated and everything like that. But one point of business I'd like to ask you, if you don't mind. I have been noticing that there have been a tremendous amount of new capital going into reinsurance carriers. And I was wondering if you could make a few comments about that, if you think that will affect the reinsurance business, have any effect on the insurance business in general, because, as you know better than I, we're still in a very soft market, and there isn't a month that goes by that I don't hear of some new reinsurance carrier, whether in Bermuda or London or somewhere. Thank you.
Okay. Walter knows more about insurance than I do, but I'll nevertheless comment on that. There has been a fair amount of capital, and there was a rush of it about, I'd say maybe 3 years ago into the reinsurance business, but there's been capital come in, and that is negative for our business. I mean, because any capital that's brought in basically will get employed. We are willing at Berkshire, and we do it. We are willing to sit on the sidelines in the reinsurance business. We'll offer quotes, but somebody that will cut those prices substantially if they've got a lot of capital and want to keep busy. And if you've got a lot of capital in this business, or if you attracted a lot of capital, you will do something. You might like to do something smart, but if need be, you'll do something dumb. You'll rationalize it so you think it's smart, but you will do it. You won't just sit there and write to shareholders at the end of the year and said, we asked you for $300 million last year, and we'd like to report that it's all safely in a bank account at Citicorp. It just doesn't work that way. So they will go out and do something. People don't like to sit around all day and do nothing. And that means that prices will get cut under certain circumstances, and that's happening now. We will, at Berkshire, we do have a rule about downsizing on that, and we have promised people at all of our insurance operations that we will never have layoffs because of a drop in volume. We do not want the people who run our insurance business to feel they have to write X dollars in order to keep everybody there. We can afford some overhead around that's costing us a little money for lack of using it at full capacity, because it isn't that much relative to the size of our insurance operation. What we can't afford are people feeling some internal compulsion to keep writing business in order to keep their jobs. So we have a strong policy on that, and if the business falls away in terms of price, we won't be doing business, but we will be around to do business in a big way when the circumstances reverse. They reversed in the casualty business for a while in 1985 or thereabouts, and we did a terrific amount of business. They reversed in catastrophe reinsurance 4 or 5 years ago, and we became very active in that. And we will have times that are very good for us in insurance. It's a lot like investments. If you feel you have to invest every day, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. It isn't that kind of a business. You have to wait till you get the fat pitch. And in insurance, it's similarly, you do not, if we had a budget for premium volume for our insurance companies, it would be the dumbest thing we could do, because they would meet the budget. They could meet any budget I set out. I could tell some operation that wrote $100 million last year to write $500 million this year, and they would meet it, and I would be paying the bills for decades to come. So it's a very illogical way to try and plan 8 or 10% a year growth. Now, GEICO is a different story in that GEICO is a business that is the low-cost operator and can attract from a huge pool business at I think, a very good rate of growth simply by letting people know what's available out there. So that is a business that I see growing under almost any circumstances. But our reinsurance business will swing around enormously in terms of volume based on what the competitor is doing, and what the competitors are doing depends to a great extent on how much money they've got burning a hole in their pocket. And right now it's going one direction, but it will change. I mean, just like investment markets change. I've been through at least a half a dozen periods where people think they're never going to get a chance to buy securities at intelligent prices, and it always changes. And in insurance business, people that misprice their policies will pay the price for it, and the world will still need insurance, and we will still be there. So